We're talking today with John Conrad of St. Joseph, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, John, can you begin with some background on yourself? Where and when were you born?
I was born September 8, 1925 in Morton Grove, Illinois.
All right. Now, did you grow up in the Chicago area, or did you move around?
We left the Chicago area with the whole family of 6 children when I was probably 12 years old.
Okay.
We moved to Michigan.
Okay. And what was your family doing for a living when you were a kid? First in Chicago and then later?
Could you repeat?
What was your family doing for a living, or what kind of job did your father have?
My father was a milkman in the suburbs of Chicago.
Okay. And now, did he have trouble keeping steady work during the Depression, or was
Very
he?
much, yeah.
Okay.
And he lost his job, and we lost our home. We had to move in with my grandmother, and she had a farm. And we ate a lot of chicken, never any beef, and never any pork. We just ate a lot of chicken. And to this day, I got tired of chicken.
All right. Now, so why did you move to Michigan?
Dad found another job,
And what kind of job was that?
a milkman.
Okay, so we got back to being milkman again.
Yes.
All right. Now, did you finish high school?
Yes, but I did it in service.
Okay. So basically, let's go back a little bit. So by the time Pearl Harbor happens, you're living in Michigan, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And do you remember how you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Yes. My mother had had a stroke. She was in a hospital bed in the house. And when the word came out, the newspaper in bold red and headlines told about it. And she couldn't speak. She didn't speak for 45 years, lived to be 90.
Wow.
She looked at me and my 2 brothers and pointed at the paper and went like that, meaning we'll have to go. And we did.
Right. Okay. Now, when Pearl Harbor happens, you're only 17, so you're not quite.
16.
Like 16. You hadn't turned 17 yet, yeah. So, how long then, what year in school were you then? Were you a junior in high school or a sophomore?
I was a freshman,
Okay.
and I had quit. Quit school. My dad didn't encourage me to go. He said I didn't go. He says, but you're gonna have to work hard.
Okay. So did you have a job then?
Yes, I did have a job then. I was working in a bakery and doing everything imaginable.
All right. And did you continue to do that until you went into the service?
No, I went to work then for a grocery store and learned how to butcher and everything in there. It delivered groceries. In those days, we would have boxes. People would call in their order. We would fill the order and put it in a box. Once a day, I would go to all of the homes that ordered it and deliver their groceries for them.
All right. Okay. Now, did you consider enlisting in the military, or did you decide?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
My dad wouldn't sign for me
Okay.
early.
All right. And then, how did you wind up entering in the service? Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I was drafted.
Okay. And how old were you when you got the draft notice? You still 18?
Yes,
Okay.
18 years.
So Uncle Sam did not wait long to call you.
No.
All right. And then when did you have to report for duty?
I think it was December 9th, 1943.
Okay. And what was the process then? You get your draft notice, you have to, where do you report first?
I reported to Fort Sheridan, Illinois.
Okay. And was that just processing there?
I should back up.
Okay.
I first had to go for a physical in Detroit.
Okay.
And then after that, when I was accepted, that's where I had to go, was Fort Sheridan.
Right. Okay. And then at Fort Sheridan, did you train there or did you just wait for an assignment?
Waited for an assignment, and that's when they boarded everybody on a train and took us to Camp Blanding, Florida. It was the J.C. Penney property that was leased to the government over there
Okay.
near Jacksonville.
Right. Okay. Now, do you remember how long it took to get from Chicago to Jacksonville by train?
It took probably 2 or 3 days.
And could you get off the train at all, or were you just stuck on it?
We were stuck on it.
All right. And could you look out the windows, or did they block
Yes,
you?
we
Okay.
we could look out the windows.
All right. Now, when you get down then to Florida, what kind of facilities did the camp have? Did it have improvised buildings or permanent ones, or?
They were improvised. They didn't look like they were built for long term.
Okay. Now, what do you remember about basic training?
It was tough because it was sand and we had to train in sand, but we built legs that would hold up a piano. I mean, a big one.
So your legs got strong because you were
Yes.
plowing through the sand all the time?
I was strong to begin with because by the time I left for service for a whole year, I was a milkman and got up every morning at 2 o'clock and worked until 2.
Yeah.
And so my legs were in great shape.
Yeah.
I thought I was sleeping in when I had to get up at 5:30 in the morning in the service because I was getting up at 2 in civilian life.
Right. Okay. And how did the drill sergeants treat you?
How did he treat us?
Yeah.
Tough. Oh yeah, very tough.
Okay. And was it hard to adjust to the discipline, or?
No, because my father was a disciplinarian.
So you could obey orders, you were in good shape, you could get up early?
Yep.
All right. And did you kind of learn the system in the Army, or figure out what to do and what not to do?
Yes.
Okay. Now, were some of the other trainees having more trouble?
Every once in a while there was trouble. Yeah.
Okay. What kinds of things would happen?
Well, there was always tricks being pulled on guys, short sheets and all that kind of stuff. There was one kid from Texas used to love to take a cold pail of water and throw it on me while I was taking a shower. And I could never get hold of him because I would murder him if I could. One day we got paired up in calisthenics and hand-to-hand fighting, and I whipped him good. He was surprised I was able to do it because I was very small in comparison. I only weighed 125 when I went in.
All right. But you were motivated?
Yes.
Okay. All right. About how long did you spend in basic training?
17 weeks.
Okay. And what different kinds of things did they teach you? You had some hand-to-hand combat, you had calisthenics, what else?
How to crawl. You keep your nose to the ground and your butt to the ground so that you could work your way through foliage in the jungles or wherever you were going to be sent to fight. There's a lot of training that took place like that. And then, of course, a lot of weapons training. I was trained on an 81 millimeter mortar,
Okay.
the water-cooled machine gun. Of course, lots of M1 training.
Yep.
Carbine training, and the 45.
Okay. Now, were you just training at this point as infantry?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And so you get to the end of 17 weeks. Now we're making it into the spring of 44. What do they do with you after you finish that training?
I had to go in. I woke up one morning with my jaw swelled up terribly. And I had 103 fever. They put me in a hospital, and I stayed there for a whole week. And then we had finished our training, and so my whole unit that I trained with, you make a lot of good friends. They all left and went into D-Day in France. And of course I was held back a week, and then I had to go. When they did ship me out, I was shipped to Italy on a troop transport and landed in Naples. And until we were assigned to our regular unit, mine was the 34th Infantry Red Ball Division, we were in tents on the property once owned by Mussolini. It was a large dairy of farm.
Okay. Let's back up a little bit. You remember, where did you sail out of from the U.S.?
Newport News, Virginia.
Okay. And then you're in a troop transport, so you would have gone in a convoy?
Yes.
Okay. And what do you remember about that sea voyage?
Well, I saw a tanker get blown up
Okay.
by a torpedo. It was a ways away from us, but it was very scary because we thought, well, maybe there was a whole wolf pack around. But it was very miserable aboard ship. It was so hot. There was no air conditioning, and there was vents, but they blew hot air. And once in a while, you'd make a scoop out of cardboard and make it scoop over your bed. And of course, heat always rises. And I was in a top bunk, and I wouldn't get by more than 15 minutes, and somebody would rip that thing away, and I had to bear the heat.
And could you get up on deck much?
Not a whole lot, and I was always hungry. I couldn't get enough to eat. I was never seasick. One day I decided, it seemed like every time I would get in line for the commissary to get a box of chocolate bars or whatever they had to sell, I'd get there and get about 10 feet away, and they'd close it down for the day. So one day I loitered close by, and I got caught, and they put me out to sweep the decks, sweep and mop them. And I did it another time, and they sent me down in the hold of the ship, and I had to handle groceries for the kitchen. I had a can opener with me, and I was never hungry again because I ate a lot of fruit cocktail.
All right. Okay. And then, so you land, so then, now do you remember going through the Straits of Gibraltar, or were you down?
Yes.
Okay.
We stopped first in Oran before we went to Naples.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Gibraltar would be before you got to Iran, because Iran is in Algeria, but yeah, okay, but you go through Gibraltar, and then stop at Iran, and then go on to Naples.
Yeah,
All right. And then you said, so then you had to camp out then on Mussolini's dairy farm for a
Yeah.
while. All right. And then you move on now to join the 34th Division. Okay. Do you remember which regiment you were part of?
the 135th Regiment.
All right. And was there a particular company you were assigned to?
It was Company C.
Okay, so C Company, 135th. Okay. Now, do you remember where they were when you joined them? Were they on the casino line, or had they gotten past that yet?
They had already left Anzio.
Okay, they were, yeah, that's right, they were in Anzio. Okay. So they pushed out of Anzio. So was this June of 44 now, or July, or?
Something like that.
Okay. So summer of 44, basically. All right. And what kind of reception do you get when you join your company? Does anybody pay any attention to you, or what happens?
My first taste of combat was walking for miles up to the front lines, seeing dead mules, Germans, and GIs. Nobody ever knew where we were or where we were going. We just walked and walked for miles until we heard lots of shooting and 88s firing.
Mhm.
After several weeks, I acquired a new weapon, which is the BAR. That's the Browning automatic rifle. Never had any training with it or ever fired one. It was very heavy, and the ammo weighed the same amount as the weapon. It was so heavy. I only weighed about 128 pounds at the time, and I missed my M1 because I was familiar with that, and I never fired a BAR. After a couple of weeks, I was able to pass the bar on to a new arrival. It felt good to get my M1 back. As time went by, fighting our way to the Apennine Mountains, life became unbearable with rainstorms for 2 weeks. The passes, trails, and pathways were a mass of mud. The tanks were bogged down and couldn't move and became easy targets for the enemy. Whenever a tank became disabled, no other vehicles could get around them, not even jeeps. This decision was made by the powers to be to fight a defensive front for the winter of 1944 and 45. It turned cold with snow, and we crossed rivers by wading, sometimes up to our armpits. Being that I only weighed 128 pounds, I thought I was going to drown, and a few guys did. Someone decided to anchor a thick rope across the river so we wouldn't lose men due to drowning. Over time, I became the 3rd Platoon Courier. Due to many roads, trails, and paths being blocked, we had to resort to moving our food, mail, and ammo by mule train. It became my job to lead the mule train. I had to walk to company headquarters each night after dark to meet and guide the train to my platoon. The mules were led by Italian soldiers, one for each mule. It was rare to get the same mules or Italians, as they were available to the whole Fifth Army, I believe. One sad event of many that sticks with me is going to company headquarters to meet a mule train. I tried often to get there as fast as possible to meet with the weapons platoon. They were always with company headquarters. We would play a couple of games of cards before the train arrived. When I arrived, something was not right. It was dark, so I couldn't see very well. I asked the only soldier around what happened. The guy was in shock and couldn't answer me. He just looked at a big pile of concrete and rocks. I finally realized that a wall of about 30 feet high, 2 feet thick, was hit by a round from a long-range German artillery weapon and buried the 34 guys that had made up the weapons platoon. Many times the infantry would occupy well-built houses, even though they were rubble and worthless. But we could hunker down in them for protection from small arms fire. Most of the time, while in combat, each soldier would affix a piece of adhesive tape, a 2-inch by 2-inch, to the back of his helmet. He could be, so we could be seen by the person in back. While we were on the move at night, during our time in the Apennine Mountains, whenever there was no moonlight, the rear echelon would direct searchlights and bounce or reflect the beams off of cloud cover. They were able to do this with extreme accuracy so that we could see quite well while on the move at night. The accuracy was so keen that it had the ability to keep the Germans in the dark, sometimes to their advantage. One night we again had to cross the same river as previously done and waded up to our armpits. As we walked after river crossing, the searchlights went out, which meant we had to almost feel our way to keep up to the guy in front because you couldn't see where you were going. After walking about 30 to 45 minutes, the guy in front of me stopped and turned to me and said that he had lost sight of the guy in front of him. I says, "How long ago?" And he said, "I can't remember." I decided to leave the ranks and walk back about a half hour to try and find a sound power communication wire. When I found it, I returned to the column of about 35 men who were waiting and told them to do an about-face and follow me. I picked up the wire and we eventually caught up to the main body of our company. Another event was when the company commander decided to have rear echelon send up fried chicken by mule train. They made a huge mistake by transporting it in aluminum pots. We devoured the chicken in minutes. It tasted so good. And soon after, all the troops got a bad case of diarrhea that made us drained and very weak. Our clothes reeked and to add insult to injury, we had to wear them for 3 days after. They had the whole company removed from the front until we could get showers and clean clothes and a couple of days to recover. The last 30 days in the Apennines were tough ones. I guided the mule train every night, loaded with mail, rations, and ammo, 6 to 8 mules, and the same number of Italian soldiers. We would go up and down a steep mountain. It took 5 hours to go up and 3 hours to go down. The best part of the duty was when I got back, I was fortunate to get first pick of the 4 sea rations that were available. The choices were pork and beans, hash, stew, and frankfurters and beans. They were a new item on the menu and were a real treat. I ate them for 30 days, 3 times per day. I was never constipated. While guiding the mule train each night, I was always leery of a saddle in the ridge of the skyline close to my immediate right as I walked. Walked the pathway of the mountain. I often imagined Germans waiting for us with burp guns ready to gun down the whole mule train. Sure enough, on the third week of the last month of my guiding in the Apennines, we were ambushed one night on the return trip. I rarely ever guided the same mules and Italian soldiers, so maybe one would rarely remember the way on occasion. All would remember on how to get back on the return trip without help. They would always ride the mules on a return trip, and they would offer to have me ride double if I wanted to ride instead of walk for 5 hours. The mules made so much noise that I hated to be near them, so I always walked. The night of the ambush, I was probably about 1 hour behind the mules and riders. When the Germans opened up with their burp guns, there was much hollering, whooping, and galloping going on. I walked very quietly to the area and could hear the Germans talking. I didn't dare make myself known to them because I wouldn't have a prayer of opportunity to take them out with my M1. I could hear 4 German voices talking. It took way too long for them to depart the area, and so I just had to hang out until they finally left. But by that time, there was too much daylight to get to company headquarters. I couldn't use the path without being detected by the enemy in daylight. I learned half the mules and Italian soldiers had been killed, and a couple of Italians that got away were wounded. The right side of the path was a drop-off, and I could see the dead mules and Italian soldiers about 30 yards down. I proceeded to company headquarters. The next night was too late to take the next mule train. No one else knew the way to my platoon and had to wait for delivery until the next night. As we took the offense in the spring of 1945 and broke into the Po Valley, I will never forget going through the area called No Man's Land, the land between the Allies and the Germans, the area where ambush patrols and reconnaissance patrols took place all winter. Many bodies were here and there, both American and Germans. Going through the Po Valley was traumatic. We traveled at a fast pace and passed, unknown to us, many pockets of German companies and battalions. One event that I will never forget was when a German column came down the highway into a small, beautiful town where our company had recently occupied. We were not expecting any problems because we came from the same direction that they came from. About 10 of us were in a room of a 3-story home and were arranging sleeping areas. Without warning, we were in a fight and find ourselves trying to dodge potato mashers. I was in the corner of the room and several guys piled on top of me. One of the mashers hit 2 of the guys and missed me. Everybody got up, even the wounded, and ran up the stairs. Including me. I grabbed a box full of our grenades going up the stairs. Many guys ran up those stairs and went into a large room. There wasn't room for me, so I had to guard the stairway. Even the company commander was in the room. The Germans positioned a small tank on a bridge and started shelling the building. We were all behind 3 thick concrete walls. The Germans fired rounds and broke through 2 walls. It took 2 rounds to get through a wall. On the third wall, the breech on their gun jammed. We were lucky. A very kind Italian gentleman told the Germans we had all gone out the back door, but there was no back door. The Germans went after a larger tank, but they had trouble trying to get it into position. They decided to pull out of the town, and we were spared. I threw the whole case of our grenades down the stairs during the night to keep the Germans from getting into the building. While we were engaging the enemy, the war was declared over, but the Germans were not communicated with and continued to engage. Finally, they found out the war was over and they were defeated. A whole regiment surrendered to our company. We traveled through Torino and then Milan. Upon arriving in Milan, we saw a large roped off area and saw Mussolini with his girlfriend both hanging by their feet. The partisans caught them trying to escape into Switzerland, but they didn't make it. We, as a unit of about 4 companies, proceeded and arrived on the coast of Italy in the Italian Riviera. We were very tired out and all but worthless. We were dreading the fact that several of us lacked enough points to go home and would probably have to fight in the invasion of Japan. We were a bunch of happy campers when we learned about the atomic bombs and the surrender of Japan. One day while walking around San Remo, Italy, I ran into First Lieutenant Hamel. He was my platoon leader in combat. After a few words, I learned he was now in charge of the regimental motor pool. I told him I was a truck driver in civilian life and asked if he had any openings, and he said, "Come over and see me." He got me a job driving a 6x6. I transported troops to embarkation ports, hauled beer for the regiment out of Switzerland, hauled sugar and flour from Alexandria, Italy for the Allied military government, hauled 55-gallon drums of 100 octane gasoline from Nice, France for the motor pool. I took groups of troops on R&R to Rome, Austria, etc. Our unit was moved from the Riviera to a small town named Udine. In Italian, they called it Udine. We had good rooms and plenty of trips to keep us busy. My buddy told me about an Italian business man who chrome-plated weapons. Along my travels in combat, I acquired a German Luger, a Belgium 38, and an Italian Beretta. I saw the expertise in the method the man did the chrome plating and decided to have my weapons done. To keep the metal of the weapons from warping, he first carefully packs each one with wet sawdust before chroming. The man said how important it was to take care to completely disassemble each weapon, including the trigger assembly, and wipe any moisture from each part. Then oil each part separately. I spent about 6 hours on the trigger assembly for the Beretta, putting it back together. It took longer than assembling everything else. The soldier in the bunk next to mine also had a Beretta, and he spent about 7 hours on his gun and gave up. He asked me for help, so I put his together in about an hour because I had the experience. When I finished his, I threw his Beretta on his bunk, and about that time, the chow bell rang. I took off for chow with my buddy. This is the same buddy that told me about the man who did the chrome plating, and he also saw me put the Beretta on the guy's bunk next to my bunk. He and I were scheduled for a 2-truck convoy to Milan to pick up troops who were on R&R. When we finished chow, he left the dining tent before me and said, "I'll see you upstairs where our bunks are located." We had some stuff to pick up before our trip. Unknown to both my buddy and myself, the soldier in the bunk next to mine loaded his Beretta with a magazine of live ammo. My buddy picked up the Beretta and, without realizing, cocked the weapon and loaded the chamber. I appeared in the doorway, and my buddy said to me, "Have you ever fired a Beretta?" And I said, "No." He was waving the weapon around, and I said, "You ought to put it down." And he said, "It's empty. You just assembled it before lunch." I said, "I know." Without thinking more about it, he pulled the trigger and shot me. The bullet entered my left leg just below my hip bone and severed the main artery to my leg. I bled like a stuck pig. It was a while before they were able to get transfusions going, and I took 7 pints of blood. My buddy felt so bad that he had a nervous breakdown. To make a long story short, the medics tried to save my leg but decided to fly me to Leghorn from Trieste, Italy, where there was a general hospital. They tried to save it, and my doctor there was a real pro but wished he could have had me in his care right away. He had to amputate 3 weeks later, but succeeded in saving to 5 inches below my knee. After 10 days on a hospital trip, I landed in Staten Island, New York, and weighed in at 95 pounds, which was in December of 1945. I was so badly infected, it took until August of 1945 before I was honorably discharged and able to walk again with a prosthesis. I was due to go back to the States within 9 days of this whole event.
All right. That gives us a lot of the basics of the story. Now, if I can, I'd like to go back and kind of ask some questions to kind of fill things in a little bit. You were talking, so was your main job then really kind of tending the mule train as opposed to being in the line someplace? Or did you?
You got into skirmishes no matter what,
Okay.
you know.
So, but I guess in the days when you're, I guess during the daytime, if you do the mule trains at night, do you rest during the day, or are you on the front lines, or are you back?
I'm resting during the day.
Yeah, and is that back in the rear, where you can get the food, or do you sometimes?
See rations, yeah.
Okay, but did you spend much time up in the front lines as well, or?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And was that before you started doing the mule trains, or were you still?
Yes, and yeah, and once in a while you get caught in the front lines at night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What impression, you mentioned the Italian soldiers, what impression did you have of them?
Well, they were glad the war was over for them, but these guys, I think, were volunteers doing what they were doing.
Yeah,
And of course, they would get out of there as soon as they possibly could. I mean, they would really jockey those horses, I mean, those mules when they took off. I mean, they didn't waste any time.
okay. So they weren't really interested in fighting anybody,
Oh, no, their fighting days were over as far as they were concerned.
right? Okay. How easy or hard was it to manage the mules?
Well, I didn't have to manage them,
Okay.
they did that. And the mules seemed to, I don't know whether the man was chose for a specific mule or what. I never learned that.
Okay. But you didn't really have to deal with them very directly
I
yourself?
never had to deal with them direct.
Okay.
But when they would go, you know, it would just echo, the sound would, you know, the only thing you would hear was 88s going off and stuff like that, and then in between you'd hear noises like that, and you wondered how close the enemy was to you.
And how much did you see the Italian civilians?
Of the civilians?
Yeah.
Not very much. Although the medic and I shared the same quarters with him wherever we were. And whenever there was somebody shot up pretty bad, I would help take them by litter. And one day he got an Italian came up to him and he said, "We have been in a cave, my wife and I, and she's gonna have a baby. Could you help me?" So I helped deliver a baby up on the front lines,
All right.
and a little boy.
Right. I guess, and once the Germans surrendered, you had several months at least in Italy while you were driving people around and things like that. So at that point now, do you see more of the Italians, or do you just drive past them?
We, we were told never to pick them up.
Okay.
Well, every once in a while, because of maybe a bridge was out, you had to go down and then up the bank. We'd have to slow down, and there would be girls waiting in the bushes, and they'd run after the truck, and the guys would help haul them into the truck. And if we were caught with girls in the truck, you lost your job. And so you never knew if there was anybody back there or not, because you couldn't, you know, out your windows, you couldn't see.
All right.
You were too busy driving in the treacherous terrain.
All right. But you might have guys who were riding in the back who would,
Oh, yeah.
Bring them on
yeah,
board.
Lots of guys, and, yeah.
okay. Now, but did you have time where you'd be off duty and go into the towns or do any tourism or anything like that since the war was over?
I never got any chances to do that.
Okay. So you kind of stayed busy with regular jobs. Okay. And you mentioned, would you go up into Switzerland to pick up beer?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember where you went in Switzerland?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't remember where I went. But every once in a while, they would give me a very small container with beer in it, with a little rubber hose that I could use to drink on the way back.
All right. Now, you mentioned at the end you were based in Udine, so you were in kind of northeastern Italy, and you actually went to Trieste to fly out to go over to the hospital. Now, at that point, were you starting to worry about the Russians and where they were or what they were doing?
No.
Or I guess they were also Yugoslav communists or things like that in that area.
No.
But no, it was just some place where you were based.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
You were concerned about where you were.
Okay, now, now, are there other things that happened in Italy or whatever that you remember that you haven't put into the story that you wrote? Or other
There's
impressions?
several things as we're talking, but now they've slipped my mind.
Okay.
That's why I wrote so much of it
Yeah.
down.
Oh, that's a very, very helpful thing to do. Now, once they finally let you out of the hospital and so forth, once you're out of the Army now, in 46, so what do you do next?
Well, I couldn't go back to work where I was because of my handicap, and it was too tough work. And so the VA, we had a local Veterans Affairs office. He said, you ought to go to school. Which takes me back to while I laid in a hospital, a very pretty woman came up to me and she says, I got your record here and it says you never finished high school. And she said, you're going to finish high school. I says, I hate school. And she says, what do you want to do, sell pencils? I said, no, you're going to go to school. And she stuck with me and got me very interested. And so when I got back into civilian life, I gave all my paperwork to my school, and they sent it in and graduated me in the class of 1947.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then having done that, what did you do?
Well, then the VA came in, nicest guy you'd ever want to meet. He said, John, you're going to go to school. I did go to school for a while locally in a junior college. But he was used to teaching kids fresh out of high school.
Right.
And he didn't know how to deal with veterans at all. As a matter of fact, not very many people teaching knew how to deal with the veterans. And I took a few classes, and wasn't interested. So he said, we're going to send you to Pine Lake in Doster, Michigan. It's a school for disabled veterans, and it is sponsored. It is a Kellogg Foundation that's been leased to the state of Michigan for $1 a year. And Western furnishes the teachers, Western Michigan College.
Yep.
You're going to go to school there. I says, well, maybe I don't want to go. And he said, I'm going to drag you there. And so I went, and I stayed there for 2 years. I got about 3 years of college training. Then I applied. My sister's father-in-law was in the finding jobs for people.
Okay, so like with an employment agency or
Yeah.
a government?
Yeah,
Thing,
well, it was
yeah.
a local,
Okay, but an employment agency,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
and he says, Whirlpool is hiring. Go over there and show them what you learned in college. So I took all my paperwork and sat down with the controller he said, John, this is good work, but we will need accountants, but he says, let's start in the payroll department. So I started in the payroll department.
Mm-hmm.
We had 26 different ways of paying people in the factory at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started, as I say, in the payroll department, learning all of these methods of how you pay people. We had about 20 girls operating Marchand calculators. And they put me in charge of the IBM department and says, you gotta put all of that stuff on IBM. So
you had a very early computer to work with? Was the IBM a computer, or was it something else?
It was punched cards.
Yes. But that's
All punched card
Yeah.
stuff. We had computers,
Yeah.
but no memory to
Right,
speak.
right.
The only memory you had was in cards.
Mm-hmm.
Like you could use the same deck of cards for, like the name and the address and all of that
yeah.
kind of thing for, and part numbers and all that. That's, was pretty, common stuff that. So, one day, the guy I dealt with from IBM, he said, we got some new equipment coming out, and he said, I talked to your boss, and he said, we're gonna send you to school to bring him to New York for 2 weeks. He says, take all the information you can with you over there of what you do here, which I did. And I worked long hours with people over there, plus went to school to learn more. And eventually, eventually we got about 40% of the work done by punch card methods. They sent me a real whiz guy from Chicago to work with me, and this guy was a genius. And I knew the stuff that had to be done, and I just relayed it to him, and he was able to take cards and dump them upside down. We got a lot of stuff done.
Okay.
And then I worked my way from there into systems, bridging the gap between the user and the IBM, or the computer area, because now we got memory and everything. And I spent 36 years with Whirlpool. The last 7 years I was in the, I worked in the sales area, not as a salesman, but working with all the people in the sales field. I would go out, meet with them, and I paid for a lot of, I don't know what I'm thinking about.
Well, you said you were talking about was working with salespeople, and were you kind of helping them manage information, or?
Yeah, man, I was their go between the field and the corporate office.
Right, okay.
And then I had to write reports. I would call all the big distributors around the United States, ask them a bunch of questions, and put it into a letter form, and then it would go out to all of the big shots in the company, I handled any time somebody would call and want to talk to the CEO because they got a problem, they would send them the telephone call to me. One day I got a call and he said, I asked for John Platts. And he says, and I got you, and you better be as good as John Platts. Anybody never heard that name, John Platts?
President
Yeah.
of the Whirlpool.
You remember his name?
I sure
No.
do.
You do?
Hell, if you live in St. Joe, you
Yeah.
know John
All right.
Platts.
So,
Yeah. Anyway, the last 7 years was a great job. I could do something in 4 hours and get pats on the back. And in data processing, you could work on a project for a whole year, and maybe it would last for 15 years. As soon as it was done, say, great job, here's another one,
Yep.
see you in another year, or something like that, you know, you didn't get a whole lot of,
all right. I guess now to look back a little bit, aside from the injury to your leg, what do you think you took out of your time in the Army? What did you learn from that, or how did it affect you?
oh, I learned a lot. I probably would never have got to the point I'm at if it wouldn't have been for my service.
So how did the service help you, do you think?
Dealing with all kinds of people from every walk of life. We even had people in the infantry that were college graduates because they wanted to be there. And there was one guy, he was really great. He kept me on a straight and narrow. We would go to church a lot. Wherever we could go to church, we'd go to church. And it was just it was a great experience. I wouldn't have traded it for the world.
All right. Well, it does make for a good story, and I think it was a good idea for you to have written that down, because we've got a pretty clear picture of a lot of the big things that happened to you. So thank you very much for coming in and sharing it today.
Thank you.
All right.
Did I-
Good job.